Yep.
February 3rd, I'm going to call the meeting to order. First order of business is going into non-public. RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 2, parent A.
Second.
All those,
Murkison, yes.
Wood, yes.
all be yes.
We're on.
We're back
Great
on.
game.
We're back on.
All right, this is a continuation of the adventure of February 3rd. The next, we don't have any public here, so the next item is.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Sitting right there.
No, he's gonna have plenty of time. Next item is approval of minutes. Let's see. We have some. We've got January 27th at 9 a.m. public minutes.
I have no changes.
Just a minute. Page 3,
Okay.
2020 warrant articles. Selectman Wood shared that he won't vote for the article with the language that removes.
Oh, yeah, that doesn't sound right, does it?
That's right.
I
Okay,
don't
I'll
mind
fix
him
that.
not
Sorry about
voting because he's a firefighter, but he
With
better
that
not
language
be.
included, or with that
No,
language
I-
removed, rather?
May I finish?
Yep,
Sorry,
go ahead.
sorry.
I specifically made the comment that I would not vote for the warrant article if the language that was removed was being funded by the fund balance. And I'd like the minutes to reflect
How is that operably different, or just what, walk me through
that.
that?
The word was fund balance. I specifically used the word fund balance.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and I do have a note there as well. This motion removes the language that states that funding will come from the unassigned fund balance, and then said I can move it kind of
Yes.
within your sentence.
He just
Okay.
wants to reinforce that that's what his opposition
I wasn't
is.
against the warrant article.
It's
as the
not
chairman made
against the,
comment.
not against the money, just
Right.
against it.
And I wanted to make sure Lloyd was shown as being not against the warrant article, being against the language.
Yes.
All right. Any
You
other
kind of
change-
spurred me along to, so, thank you,
Any
Mr.
other,
Chairman. Other than that, I'm all set.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move approval as corrected.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. January 27th, non-public at 11:27.
I'll move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. January 31st, public minutes, 9 a.m.
I'm all set.
I'll move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And January 31st, non-public.
I'll move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Nice. Rock and roll. Our first appointment is with Jeffrey MacGyver and Jeffrey Nevins, is it Nevins? For Consolidated Communications, broadband coverage, etc.
Come on down.
Come on down.
All right. Good morning.
Hi.
Jeff McIver.
I think
Good
that
morning.
one is probably-
Lloyd Wood.
Do you mind sitting here
For
for
the,
that?
for the
Okay,
public
thank
right
you
there.
so much.
I'm not Jeff Nevins.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's
You guys need a computer.
Yep, Bill, nice to meet you.
Okay. I didn't know how many people would be interested. Did they print out the
That was Friday afternoon.
Is that
All right.
before or after you and Linda?
I don't know if he's here.
Is it right there?
That's the
It was
rest
still
of
like,
it was
still
the
making
normal.
trouble.
Okay, Steve.
Okay, so I
Steve.
don't really know what's in there.
Hopefully Steve's moving back around.
Yeah, he is.
He is, yeah.
I've never heard go to the back row.
Down in front.
You see this on the Powder Mill Hatchery Brook going into Alton Bay, phosphorus up to 1,000.
Yeah, that fish plant.
Yeah, I'm gonna give this to,
Are you here for this?
it's part of the lake, it's part of the watershed.
Oh, yeah.
You might be interested in that aspect.
Yeah, she knows about
Nice
it.
to meet you.
Does she?
Yeah.
I'm
Hi, how are you?
See this, the first time I ever picked up the paper.
Hey, Franny? Franny?
Yep, yep. All right, awesome, thank you.
We're on tape on getting your conversation, so thank you.
Here in regards to this.
You're not.
Okay.
All for public. And we have several presentations.
What about it?
Okay, all right.
This-
So I think we were just pulling this meeting together today to talk through maybe the process, what the current setup is for the town, what we have to offer, what's out there for broadband, answer any questions around the technology. So what I've done here is when we meet with towns, is we like to give them a little bit of an overview. First of all, what the current shape of broadband is throughout the town, what the town's qualified for. So sometimes there's situations where and you can look at this right here where the current customer speed mix. So these are our customers, consolidated communication customers. 71% only have up to 7 meg download speeds. Now the table to the right of that, or the pie chart to the right of that, actually shows that 38% of our customers are actually qualified for speeds that are in that 38% range. So without us even doing anything right now, our current customers could call in and they're qualified for greater speeds if they're looking to improve their overall broadband speed. A big chunk of why is when we were Fairpoint Communications 2 years ago to Consolidated Communications today, we have actually done a good amount of work out in the field, updating our systems, updating our technology, and just we haven't come out and marketed that yet. So people aren't aware that they do have better speeds or are capable for that. Now the large chart in the bottom there represents the overall town qualified speed capabilities. So those are the max speeds. So 10% of the town currently does not qualify for broadband through us. And that mostly is due to distance, geography and distance. So they're so far away from pieces of equipment that they can't get high enough speeds in order to call in for.
And the bottom pie chart, the total
Yeah.
town, when you say town, you're referring to the part of the town that Consolidated serves, or the whole town?
The whole town.
Okay, so this includes the TDS supported area?
Actually, so what it includes is, this is all built off of end user locations, right? So anywhere where in the past we have put in copper lines or phone lines, these are all addresses that come up in our system.
Okay, so it's your service area, not the whole town.
More than likely, because we're the provider of last resort, so at one time before the competition had come in, copper, if someone had some kind of phone service from us, at some point in time, they would show up as an end user
Well, the
location.
predecessor to TDS was the first telephone service in the town of Tuftonboro. So they were here long before anybody else
They
came.
were, so then that might be an isolated pocket, we'd have to look
Right,
at.
that's what I
That is
say.
potential.
So when you say total town, you're referring to the consolidated service area.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what this exercise is, to identify some of that overlap.
And so this is based off of 1,633 addresses. that come up in our
And that's how
system.
many addresses you service?
That's how many of those end user locations, so that's not how many we service. So there's a chunk in it at 10% that currently don't qualify, so we can't provide service to them right now.
Can't provide what service?
Broadband, so they don't qualify for us.
So they're a telephone service capable customer of
why-
yours, but not a internet.
Internet.
Why would they not qualify?
So they're, we can't get enough speed out there for them to
Even
have
though
internet service.
on the, neighborhood around them? I mean, I'm looking at the map.
Yep.
Okay, so if you go to Tuftonboro Corner, which is up on 171, you got a pink dot in the middle of blue dots.
And that might just be an anomaly there.
Yeah,
So where-
an anomaly.
Yeah, so.
Because you got other,
Where it's a
you've
bad-
got other anomalies
That piece
here.
of data right there.
I mean, if you go down on 109A, you've got blue dots on top of green dots.
Well, it all depends on which way the customer's served, because not everything goes by the way the crow flies. Sometimes the path could take a different path. So even though a customer could be near one another, they may be served out of different equipment. I'm not sure exactly which one you're looking at, but
So
that's
the-
oftentimes what we would say.
And looking at the map, the 10% that's on the
Yeah.
front pie chart,
Pardon?
the 10% that's on the front pie chart,
Yes.
which you're calling non-qualified,
Yes.
could be up to .768.
The 0.768 actually is a qualified speed.
Yeah, that's a different pink.
So the green ones,
It's a different
the
pin.
green ones are
green.
the non-qualified. So
Yes.
it's a
Got it.
different color scheme between the front sheet and the
Correct.
second sheet.
So in.
Yeah, but if you're qualified for .768, you're really not qualified for anything. I mean, that's like,
I would tend
It's
to
like-
agree as a product guy.
is AOL your
No.
server?
So, and this is more just a representation to show you the areas
Mhm.
of the town that, have, better speeds versus other areas. We just do this, in a way as where some towns might not be looking at a whole fiber to the home approach as a possible solution, but maybe it's looking at a section of a town that they just want to improve on.
With my section.
So that's one of the key, that's one of the key strategies, I guess, going into this meeting today is just to kind of give you a look at, how we're providing service to the town, show you areas that, could use better service, as we, continue to work with you on maybe what's the best approach moving forward.
So as we look at what you're presenting here,
Yep.
again, the pie chart that says current customer capable speed mix,
Yes.
almost 40% of them are capable of the highest speed levels that you have available, correct?
Yep. That's our.
And about a third of them are only capable of the lowest speed. So does Consolidated have a plan going forward to address that third, to bring the speed capability up? I mean, I think it's interesting what the customers choose to buy.
Yeah.
But that's a personal choice.
Right.
So, but if they don't have high-speed internet available at all, like the 10% down here at the bottom, or this other third that only have slow-speed broadband available, they don't have the opportunity to make that choice, right?
Right.
So are you folks working on a program now to address those?
So there's
Situations.
there's a few different things, and actually I might rely on Trip a little here, being,
Yeah.
his expertise. But, so one is we do continue to look into technology, ways to improve what we currently have and what we call as our D-SLAM area. So this is our pieces of equipment out in the field that pushes those with speeds, trying to figure out ways to improve our blades in there.
So the short version is, the existing infrastructure that's out there now is copper, and it's twisted pair copper. And it was originally built for single pair, twisted pair copper to go to a home to be able to provide telephone service, simple tip and ring,
Right.
that goes back to a central office. We've got other serving gear throughout the entire town, where we now push technology out a little deeper to get closer to the home, to shorting those copper loop lengths. So it's a matter of us retrofitting existing network and basically using technology advancements to try to deliver greater speeds to greater distance. At the end of the day, some of those pairs and some of that aging infrastructure and some of that copper just will not support some of the technologies that we would like to bring to bear. At some point in time, that copper will be decommissioned and go away at some point. What we're talking now is retrofitting that with fiber overlay. We can either fiber overlay that and push that deeper and shortening up and making available good condition copper pairs, or bring fiber to the house, every single home, every single business, every single edifice. Once you bring it to that home, then there is no speed questions, there is no can we get to it, because once I get fiber there, all speeds are available. Any speed tier that I have becomes available. Right now, I have multiple speed tiers, but I can only get that at a very certain, the highest speeds that you see here are very close to our equipment, very close to the serving equipment. Some of these people, you know, in this, like he said, the 768, the 1.5 meg, 3 meg, can't do a lot of the newer emerging technologies that you want to do with the streaming videos and things of that nature. So eventually we'll build it, but it's a growing growth pattern as each individual town. You only go so far, you can only reuse the copper so far. At some point, you got to introduce fiber in some way, shape, or
Right.
fashion.
So, do you have an active program now, just looking at overall metrics here that can give us a sense that, for instance, well, in 2 years, we want that 1/3 to be 1/6, or,
It's a variety of programs that we're bringing to bear, but we couldn't say in 2 years when we would get back down to push that copper deeper. So you're talking the natural evolution of the network? Probably wouldn't happen for quite some time until we get a chance to lay that fiber out, which is why we're engaging in these conversations to work with public-private partnerships to try to bring it to some towns a little bit earlier, those that are interested in doing so. A lot of the upgrades that we would plan on doing, we've done. Some of them haven't been marketed yet, but a lot of the upgrades that we're doing, we've gone in and changed the gear at the serving center to then take advantage of the newest technologies to get that greatest copper use, to push it down further, and doing some
you can
bonding.
only go so far with equipment though, right?
Yes.
Sooner or later, you gotta change the cable.
Exactly, which is what, the kind of where we're at that dichotomy right now. So, and we've bonded pairs to get the better speed, but we're wringing every ounce out of the network as is possible with the existing copper. At some point, an overbuild of fiber is necessary at some level to bring it any further. And there is no plans to bring fiber to this town naturally that I'm aware of at this stage.
Well, there's no plan by Consolidated.
Not naturally to bring that, not
Right.
that I'm aware of, yeah.
How do you see Consolidated working with the Carroll County Coalition for Broadband?
We're very much a part
I
of
know
it.
I went to a meeting where some executive from Consolidated was there.
Over in Wolfboro.
Yeah.
Rob
Yes,
Costa?
I was there that day
Yeah.
as well.
I mean, I wasn't completely convinced that the business model that he's presenting is the one we're looking to do.
Okay.
But, I mean, the initiative, I think, going forward is gonna be to try to get some federal grant money to get some rural fiber optic systems going, and countywide. And I think it's moving pretty quickly.
Yes.
Do you have any sense how that is gonna impact smaller communities? I mean, Wolfboro thinks that they're gonna do it by wireless, which doesn't make as much
Well,
sense to
and,
me. but-
and we've met with towns your size all over
Mhm.
the state. We've
Right.
built out these partnerships, right? We're encouraging towns to go ahead with the RFI, RFP process
Mhm.
and getting a document out there. Now, we are very competitive with the way that our proposals are being sent out, but this is in the town's best interest too, just to see, what other providers out there
Sure.
can do this. Now, what we're what we're proposing to towns is an entire town solution, right? So this 10% here that we're talking about, 160, end user locations that currently receive no qualified speed, they're gonna have the ability to have up to 1 gig if they wanted to, with this option. This is the proposals that we're putting out there right now are using a bond, right? The town's going out, they are getting a tax-free bond. It's a 20-year bond, and it's all paid through by the service fee, right? By the actual user. So anybody that from the town that wants fiber, they're going to be charged a $9 fee, $10 fee, whatever the fee is to cover that bond over 20 years, and that'll pay itself back in and pay for the bond.
Right.
On top of that fee, they'll subscribe to whatever speed works best for them. 25 meg all the way up to 1,000 meg or a gig. This,
And again, when you speak of the town, in our case, you're talking about the portion of the town that Consolidated serves.
If we were gonna propose this, we would propose to go to every edifice
Yeah.
in town, every residence, every home, everywhere, we would go. to
Business
every
and
input.
Including the TDS service
Yes.
area?
Yeah. Unless there was some exclusivity agreement that prohibited us from
Well,
doing so.
not, the federal government has some restrictions on some of this stuff in rural telecommunications. And I mean, there are things that you can't just say, we're gonna bring somebody else in. I've been told, so.
okay,
I can speak to that. Our fire chief is always trying to re-examine a portion of his budget. A few years ago, he could put an alternate telephone service in at Melvin Village Station. That would save a few bucks. Legally, he can't do it because the federal government has protected those old rural telephone services. And we're affected several areas in town that way.
There's a couple of, areas of concern. Are you guys our cable provider? Is that how that works?
We're not cable,
You're
we're copper phone
Right.
by tradition.
So we've got a pushback from cable because we've got a monopoly going on there. The problem I had with the presentation of Wolfboro was, we're gonna go out and borrow the money. Taxpayers or the community's gonna pay for the bond to borrow the money. My feeling, now we own the lines. Your company needs to get into a business model that provides the service, rather than taking all of the benefit for the line. I didn't see any of the line benefit ownership coming back to the communities. So if we're gonna raise $20 million, let's say, to do fiber optic in a big area here in the middle of the state, that $20 million needs to get paid back. It's just not a zero-sum game where the taxpayers fund the $20 million and then you guys get to operate and charge whatever you want. That's not a business model that I see is gonna work. It has to be one where the people who actually paid for the bond get some benefit.
They own the network.
They own the network, but given the way he described it, had no control over the rate. And we need to have some controls over what the customer's gonna pay. So essentially, the way I saw that presentation going down was, we paid for all the hard goods, and you guys made all the money. And that, it needs to have a little more balance to it, or a good deal more balance to it. Well, we're running into this problem with the cable companies, where they've legislated all these protections for cables. But we don't have any place at the table. There's nothing we can negotiate with those people. The other issue that I've heard coming down the pike a little bit is that you're gonna have to get in bed with New Hampshire Electric in order to get pole space. Maybe, I don't know. But they're pushing back on getting involved in fiber optic networks countywide, let's say. So one of the elements that I heard, and I'm not even sure that it's true, but people are saying, at any rate, that Consolidated will give up their rights to put electricity over the poles, and New Hampshire Electric will never get in the fiber optic business. So it seems like there's some stumbling blocks along the way. That,
So I haven't heard anything as far as the electric with the
Yeah.
poles goes. As
well,
far
you're
as-
already on the poles.
Yeah, we have rights of way and they have rights of way on the poles. They're at different levels on the poles, so
Right.
they can run fiber. We're not gonna be in the electricity business. Some electric cooperatives are getting in the fiber business and running
Yeah.
fiber on their space, but our space is where the copper is already. That's where we would run the fiber. So I don't see any pole contention as far as the right of way goes.
Okay.
Ownership of
It
the
may have been
network is
a
another
different,
animal.
it may have been a different company other than
Yeah.
Consolidated.
Yeah, well, I haven't.
But
heard
I mean, I can't see how the county or the coalition cannot have a service provider who's gonna have the trucks and all the other stuff that goes along with keeping the fiber optic network going. That said, it can't be another cable monopoly like the cable monopoly we currently are living under. It has to be a partnership, if you will.
Yep, and our,
Yeah.
so as far as our rates go, right,
Yeah.
they're the same, they'll be the same throughout the whole state. They're competitive with everyone else, with our competition out there. So as far as a different rate, for the area, it's something that, one, that's tough for us to be able to do that. If you look at region by region, area by area, our prices are the same throughout the state. So,
The only difference would be the fiber
Premise
fee.
on what, though? I mean, currently you're not providing fiber optic cable to everybody, right?
Correct.
correct.
So your rate structure is premised on
Where we
copper,
could provide
and it's-
fiber service.
And you own that copper. I mean, that's yours. It's not ours, it's not the communities, it's not the coalitions, it's yours, it's your
Right.
asset. All I'm saying is that we need to start a conversation about if we're gonna fund this and pay for the hard asset of the fiber optic cable, then we need to be on an equal level at the negotiating table when it comes to, you decide you need a rate increase 5 years from now. What is the premise for that? Is it the cost of service? Is it the cost that whoever, Silicon Valley or whatever those people are charging you? Is it cost to maintain the line? We need to have a lot bigger conversation than us paying for your hard goods and then you getting to charge whatever you want.
Well, I thought I heard you say that you were looking to use public bonds, but that the repayment of the bonds came from the customers, not from the local government.
Not from the taxpayers. You don't get a tax. So if you're a copper user right now, and your town overbuilds fiber to every location, you're not required to get that fiber, you're not required to pay for that fiber, you can continue to pay for the copper. Our fiber rates, to your point, our rates are the same throughout, for me right now, all 3 states, for what you pay for the overall service. The service remains competitive with the TDSs of the world, the electronic broadbands. We're in a competitive market space. So our rates are always gonna be competitive, but we're gonna work ourselves out of business entirely. So what would happen is there'd be a fiber charge to get the fiber. If you chose to get the service, you pay an extra $10 or $15 to get that fiber service. That $10 or $15 is the only thing, and that is the negotiable rate, that piece that you would pay for Tufton Borough specifically. But that's gonna fall on with the other rates that I have throughout the entire state. So what you're paying in Moulton Borough, Alton, anywhere in the state. If you go down to Laconia, or if you went over to Chesterfield right now, you're gonna pay the same prevailing rate plus the fiber infrastructure fee
See,
that you would pay on
I don't know
top.
if you can actually avail yourself of public bond rates unless the public is doing the bonding and consequently doing the paying. I mean,
Yeah,
I
they
don't
pay
think,
back
I don't
for
think
your
you can
fee.
borrow money at our rates, town rates, and then spend it however you want and collect the revenue from it. I don't think, I'd have to look at it. but
The other thing, I hear where you're going this with the monetary consideration. If the town is paying for half of the fiber, and we're using that fiber for 20 years to make money,
Right.
we're paying for half the fiber. So a lot of cases, if it costs $5 million, we're putting in 2.5, your town,
So
and I'm
that's
rough
that
numbers,
wasn't
your
clear-
town would
okay,
bond
that wasn't
2.5.
clear at the Wolfboro.
Yeah, well, that's how that would work.
Do you have a document that discusses all of this proposal?
Definitely. I could, so we could.
And maybe you've already sent it, Karen, I don't know.
So I would be happy to provide you with a sample proposal, and I'd even be happy to
Language
provide you
model.
with a sample contract.
Right.
So what the contract is, you know, that we're putting out to towns right now on these private partnerships. So you guys could get a feel for what it is.
Well, the fellow in Wolfboro had mentioned an area in upstate New York,
Yep,
and I think someone had asked,
we're
Can
in
we-
the Albany area.
yeah,
Mhm.
can we have a copy of that contract, see what it looks like? Because until we do see that language, we really don't know what we're negotiating.
So-
I think the language will help you to clarify what
Right.
you're looking at.
It will, and like I said, I give you a contract of what we're using right now in New Hampshire, as we're working with towns like Walpole, Westmoreland, Dublin, Harrisville, you know, all these other towns.
And I don't know how the federal money plays into it. And there's a meeting, I think, on the 14th.
You're going to it, right?
Yeah, sometime in the middle of February, there's another coalition meeting. And we need to get a handle on how, if there's a large chunk of federal money coming in here for rural broadband, how does that affect whatever deal you're looking to make?
Yep.
You know, how, if we're not borrowing the money, we're getting the money in some other
But-
fashion.
But the proposal that you're presenting, that you're talking about, is separate from what the coalition is working on.
I just
Is that
think
right?
it's what the coalition's working on, I believe what Rob presented that day, is just a much larger scale,
Yeah.
right? So,
Okay.
one way that you can benefit from that is when it comes down to the fee. So we believe that if all the towns went in together on this and we ran it similar to how what we're doing with the towns, the service fee per resident would go down just based off of scale.
Yeah. more people.
Now, some other towns have reached out to us. Due to the geography, the level of scale for them, their fee per resident that wants to buy in, they don't have to, but wants to buy in to the fiber network, would be a little higher. So that's something to consider there as well. And just to kind of go back, some fresh data here as far as how this partnership works, and I think where maybe Rob had left it off or we didn't pick up on it that day we presented. So a town just recently put out an RFP, they selected our proposal, and for them to bond to the underserved areas, the areas that are, you know, below 25.3, it was about $865,000 for them to bond. We're throwing in to that $750,000 in order to, one, take care of all those areas that are considered served, so they get the 25.3 or higher, just so we can make sure that, again, everyone in the town has fiber. And then we're actually paying for the drops. So we're paying for everything from the pole, where the fiber hit the pole, all the way into the house. So that's not included in that.
Oh, no, I agree with you. We're gonna need if the Carroll County Coalition comes up with a big bunch of money, they're still gonna need
Oh, yeah.
technical people and, you know, people that provide the service.
And that's where
I'm not gonna go out there and
partnership
climb a pole, and I don't even know what fiber optic looks like, so.
We
Yeah.
don't want you climbing a
No, we don't.
pole. Or me.
I have some questions for you.
Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
First of all, thank you for appearing. We have a lot of interested people. Are there any neighboring towns that have already in the pipeline that are negotiated with you, that you've reached agreements with?
None from Carroll County.
The reason I ask is, I'll give you an example. The selectmen work with our road agent, and on his paving schedule, each year we bundle projects together in our town, but also if we can bundle with the neighboring towns, they're not moving their equipment away, and it's not unusual to save 5 figures in our paving cost. Might be insignificant compared to other communities, but to for this little rural town, that's significant.
And that's definitely something that we would, consider as we're working through this process.
And I understand that boundaries, we have several utility providers of electricity. On Lang Pond Road, it actually comes from Wolfboro. So if you're with the fire department and a pole gets snapped off, which utility company do you call? It's interesting. What are the costs to the towns and what are the citizens' individual costs? Do you have any idea on that?
Are we talking about if they, like currently?
If you
or-
were to implement the
So,
strategy.
to give you an idea as far as that service fee goes, right, with individual towns, our lowest service fee to start is $9. Our
A month?
highest- A month, yeah, per end user. And then our highest was $20.
Okay. What about cost to the town, its involvement? If there's any public bonds or things like
It's
this?
just the bond.
One bond, the initial
Just
bond.
the initial bond.
Okay, and the town, at town meeting, how much in tax dollars is that gonna be?
Zero tax dollars would be a fee, we call it a fiber infrastructure bill recovery fee, that we put on the bill of the individual user who chooses to get that service. Somewhere between $9 and $20 on top of what our prevailing rates are, is what that ends up being.
And that model is based upon my personal electric bill and my personal telephone bill. There's additional fees built in other than the actual service. The next thing is,
Pardon me?
And
in my electricity bill and my telephone bill,
Yeah,
there's how much for electricity
yeah,
or how much for the service of
Yeah.
telephone, but there's other fees that are attached.
fees, taxes, and
Yeah.
surcharges
Yes.
and things of that nature. That's what this
Telephone,
would
for
be.
example, 911, I pay 52 cents.
This would be a line item on that bill, and that
Yeah.
would be the only thing different from, say, a neighboring town that happened to already have the service.
And just to add one more thing, as far as the public buildings go, as part of these contracts, we are hooking up and providing service to 3 public buildings at no charge.
That was the next question I had. Thank you.
Perfect. So they've chosen library, police station, like the town office.
Are schools
DPW.
totally separate?
Schools are separate. That's the only one that's separate because their funds come from, I believe, a national fund.
Okay.
Usually under E-rate.
You are what type of utility? Electricity, telephone, cable, cell phone?
Telephone.
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 Do you anticipate any significant change in technology?
Yeah, we're in the middle of it. Yeah, we're going from copper to fiber.
But
That's what this-
but it's not like just in 2 years we're gonna go to satellite or anything
No,
like that?
at the end of the day, there's a lot of promise of different flavors of wireless, and we're actively looking at those flavors of wireless. We backhaul a lot of the cellular signals that are, some people, lay people would think that, when your cell phone goes from one tower to the next tower, most cases it's going to the tower and ground to fiber. Anytime you can get it on fiber, you wanna get fiber. That's really the superhighway of the future. That's almost, future-proofing the town if you put fiber in to every location, once you do that. Because right now, the theoretics will get you up to close to 1,000 megabits. There's really not much that you can't do technology-wise now, and then the theoreticals will take you beyond that, for things we don't even know about yet, so fiber will be able to do that as well.
And just to add to that as well, fiber will continue to grow. So right now, we're offering a gig. The way we're setting these towns up, right? So you're gonna have fiber to your poles all the way into your house. The improvements with technology is it's gonna go to 10 gig, which will be next. Now, the nice thing with that is we're gonna be able to make that update in the central offices, in our back offices. So where we're just pulling that piece of equipment out, putting it in, and we're not gonna have to go through and change the pole, what's going to the poles and change everything going to the house.
The size of the pipe is going to be big enough, if you will, to handle.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
Yeah.
And we're looking at all kinds of broadband emerging technologies, NG-PON2 and NXG-PON, all these new emerging technologies. Right now, we're at a gig 2 gig might be next, and then 10 gig
It'll
from there.
never be fast enough.
Well, right now, 1 gig is fast enough. I challenge you to use it all up
But
at your
then you
house.
get used to it and suddenly.
Oh, yeah.
You want more.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like everyone here. I have a 25 too. I live in Franconia, New Hampshire, so I'm small town. If I could get fiber, I would be getting fiber too. I'd pay $30 a month additional fee to be able to get the fiber, but it's not available in our town. And unfortunately for me, our town's not even in these discussions. You know, our select board, it's not even on their radar. At least it's on the radar in this town, so the townspeople would benefit greatly. You know, what it does to just the real estate values alone to a house. To be able to say, yes, we've got broadband. Kids have to, you know, they have to get on the broadband if they do their homework these days. Sometimes the teacher will assign homework just assuming they can get on it. They always can, you know, and then they gotta go somewhere else to get it. And if you wanna work from home, and I'm a cord cutter, so on top of this, there'll be video type options. Right now, people are streaming videos, the Prime Video and the Netflix. We have a CCI TV product that will also roll down on that. So this ends up being the super highway for the future once you get the fiber.
Sounds like we're in the candy store.
Yeah, well, I'm a product guy, so I'm a little bit different. I have a
I had a couple of other comments.
Great.
You don't own the poles, right?
No.
This is what citizens say to me. If electricity goes all the way to that corner of town, and that corner of town, and that corner of town, and that corner of town, why can't another wire be strung to my house? Do they have a point?
Say that again.
Yeah.
If the town of Tuftonboro,
Yeah.
and this is what citizens say to me, there is electricity supplied to all 4 corners of this town.
Mm-hmm.
Your service only needs a wire put on those poles, correct?
A fiber. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So then it's just a cost of installing the wire, isn't it?
Yeah. Cost of installing the fiber infrastructure network and terminating on the proper equipment to provide the service.
And I realize that whether it's moving water one way or sewer the other way, there has to be ways of keeping the flow going. Same with electricity, there needs to be transformers and all that.
Yep.
But the citizens have reduced it really to the lowest common denominator, haven't they?
Yep, in a lot of cases,
Okay.
yes. So we need fiber.
Right.
So one of the challenges from the existing infrastructure that's here is, when I live a mile and a half down a dirt road from where there's adequate service, okay, and I say, I'd like it here, and the provider says, we can do that. It's gonna cost you $15,000 to get it, or whatever, to get it from where it is to your, because you're the only person that's gonna use this particular piece of supply pipe. And so, I guess from my thought process, which, you know, one of the benefits of taking to looking at what's there and saying we're gonna upgrade the whole system is that everybody that's on the system then pays a part of it, not, well, you're already where you have it, so it doesn't cost you anything to get a little upgrade. But the guy that's at the end of the dirt road down here that's gonna cost $15,000 to have it put in, it becomes part of a pool that then everybody participates in and benefits from, right?
I think I hear what you're saying, but you probably have 2 different schools there, because the guy down the street is gonna pay the one infrastructure fee if he chooses to get it. He's gonna save himself that $15,000.
Right,
Where
exactly.
the guy that's already got the service, he can't get the fiber service either right now. So until we bring him fiber.
Right, so everybody has an improved benefit.
Yes.
The guy.
Has the ability to get that benefit, but they're not
Well,
required to take it.
They buy it, right.
Yeah.
But, so, with the upgrade that you're talking about, if I'm in an area that has access now to the yellow, okay, I'll be able to get to the blue, right?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, no, well
If-
beyond the blue.
Yeah.
Well-
What we're talking about isn't even on
All right,
these graphs.
so, but if I'm currently in the pink area, I'll be able to get to the blue. And it'll cost me $10 a month for access to that, regardless of whether I'm in the pink or the yellow now to get to the blue.
Have you
above and beyond, but let's clarify, we're talking about getting to the green.
All right.
The blue is a different scenario
All right.
altogether. The green would be the 1,000.
Okay.
This is 100.
All right.
Yeah.
Just curious, so is this an actual live, like, is this I mean, do you actually live a mile and a half off? Okay.
No, but we
No,
do,
but
we do have people in town that are in that situation.
Personally, I live a little over a quarter of a mile off the main road.
Okay, do you have poles?
And when I built my house, the electric company wouldn't put electricity in there without a $15,000 commitment from us.
Do you have poles going to your house?
Now we have poles going to our house, but we had to pay $15,000 to get them.
And we're not gonna
So,
charge you anything.
but
Yeah.
you're not gonna charge it, and we could go on all morning, we got other appointments, but you're not gonna charge anything for the initial install. But if a road comes up, North Line Road gets improved.
Development.
Okay, now we're gonna have to put in more. That's where this commitment on our end breaks down, and you're.
I think we just need to understand better how the whole
Yeah.
thing
The
works.
contract,
How's
yeah.
it-
Yeah.
But in that scenario, right, and I'm sorry, I know you guys have more meetings, but
Yeah.
in that scenario, right, and this question came up on Saturday. You guys put in a new development, new set of houses, we're gonna run the lines down there on us. So that's part of this.
I didn't even know that. That's good.
Yeah. And that came from Rob.
Oh, yeah.
So-
Right.
I had another question. As I understand it, you're a utility and you pay taxes on infrastructure, correct? To the town? For
No, they
example-
pay a lease to New Hampshire Co-op.
Okay.
And included in that lease is gonna be a tax factor that New Hampshire Co-op figures out.
The utilities in Tufton Borough are our biggest taxpayer on their poles and equipment. But you know what's interesting is, many years ago, the state utility board, whatever it is, allowed a 5% depreciation a year. After 20 years, the utilities do not pay 1 cent
So
on
the
that
depreciation
pole.
is down to 0 at that point? The
That's
pole is
right.
still in
But
place.
that's changed.
Yeah.
We want to clarify. that.
That's-
Yeah,
that's-
the
that's
pole question,
changed.
because I'm not under sure. We have the right of way, but we replace the poles. Stick with that.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
So you do have liability.
Thank you for
for
answering
both.
my questions.
All right,
Oh,
so you're gonna
please.
get a.
Thanks for having
contract.
us.
Yes, I'll be able to pull together a contract
Yeah.
and a sample
Super.
proposal that
Yeah.
should be able to help, and, you know, we're still, pretty close, so
Yeah.
if we needed to get back together and answer any more questions, we'd be more than happy to.
We often visit with the town multiple times, different audiences, depending on needs, reinforce. That's what we do, that's we're the advanced group, so.
Well, we're
Yeah,
taped, and it's
yeah.
on YouTube, and I'm sure there's gonna be at least 3 citizens out there that will ask a question. and
Oh, beautiful.
There'll be time for public input.
All right,
Thank you.
great, thanks for
Thank
coming
you very
in.
much. I'll give you one extra.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, good seeing you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You too. Good luck.
Thank you.
Have a safe drive back, sir.
Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. Oh, I'm very familiar with these roads.
All right, the next order of business is the 9:30, now it's 10 o'clock. Environmental baseline assessment from Norman Dew Associates.
Can I use the projector?
Yep, all set, yep.
Need protection, you're safe here.
Yeah, we can try to pair this podium.
Is that yours?
Oh, was it? Thank you. Sorry. Okay.
What's the best way to do this? Should I stand up there?
Sure.
Okay. Join me? Come on up here.
Around us where we can watch.
And we can have our other folks call in. Right.
Yep.
There, okay.
I'm just gonna make something here for the phone.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
number for us. So dial 712. 451 0000.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize it was a
Oh, yeah.
distance.
So 712
1, 2.
451
Yep,
0000.
okay.
And then there'll be an access code.
No, it's his brother. It's his brother. It's his younger brother.
Yeah. Should I use this or my own? Can I set up my own?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So 716 896. Oh, sorry, 717 896.
Oops. Yeah, right.
Sorry.
You have to go.
No, no, it'll pass on.
Well, that's because
Try to-
offered some unbelievable punctuation. Sorry.
717 896.
717,
896.
okay.
And then we'll need a pin. Okay.
Are you the host?
Yes. 9372.
Not work that long.
I'm trying.
Yes.
Joel, Betty.
I can either use this or my own. Speaker, please. Hello? Who do we have on the phone? This is Joel.
George Christian here.
Hey, George.
Did you all have Joe's name?
Joe? Do we have Bob? No? Maybe he'll show up later. All right. Stand by. We gotta set up our presentation real quick. So why don't I use this one? I'll give you my flash drive.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. And there's this. Oh, do you have to log in?
Oh, thank
That's
you.
quick.
That's fine.
Right here.
Oh, okay.
Your slot over there.
And that one's a mouse. Hey, morning. Do you have an extra?
Baseline studies, yeah, that's it.
Optics, if that light's charged out, it's a little bit better.
Yeah, we may need that. Some of these slides might be a little dim. While we're waiting for this, should we do a quick introduction? So, for Normando Associates, I'm Joel Detty. I'm the project manager, and also led the water quality study component of this. We've got Harry
I'm Harry
Stewart,
Stewart, senior associate.
Sean Stibble.
and led the fishery study for this. Harry's our senior oversight. And then on the phone, we've got George Christian, who did our macroinvertebrate analysis, and Joe Snavely, who's our mussels expert. So he was one of the report authors as well.
Oh, a physical demonstration.
Yeah. And so who do we have out in the audience? I know, obviously, the Selectmen, we have the Conservation Commission here.
Yeah.
And are any of your other consultants here? You were talking about bringing your watershed consultant out. Can you hear me? Is that Joe? Yeah, just kind of lurk in the background. We'll bring you in if needed, but you're on a speakerphone in the front of a room, so it'll be hard to hear you.
Okay, I'll be on mute.
Okay.
And I'm here too, Joe. George Christian. I can hear you just fine. Can you
All right.
hear me?
Well, we'll try to keep this pretty informal, so just jump in if I misstate anything or you want to correct me or correct my semantics. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the 2019 19 Mile Brook Baseline Environmental Assessment final presentation. I had changed all of my fonts on there. That's interesting. So, I don't know why I did that. Quick background here. So this all stems around the construction of the Wolfboro Rapid Infiltration Basin discharge that was constructed back in 2009. And we were contacted prior to that to conduct a baseline study to go out to the impacted brook that would indirectly receive the wastewater discharge here and do a comprehensive evaluation of the environmental condition of the stream. So what does the stream look like before any development within the watershed? Development in this case being the discharge. And we looked at an assessment of aquatic habitat, so what are the conditions that support the stream environment, surface water quality as well. Grab the water here. The benthic macroinvertebrate community, and this is the wildlife that lives in the stream bed itself, so the little critters that live down there. Terrestrial wildlife, fish living in the stream, and then any rare, threatened, and endangered species. So here's a quick overview of the study site. 19 Mile Bay is on the left. Is there a pointer? There you go. This is going to help. So 19 Mile Bay on the left, and then here's 19 Mile Brook. The discharge site is up here right by the town line, and we've got our monitoring stations basically from just upstream of the town line and above, that's key there, above any influence from the rib discharges, and then sites downstream as well and in and around Whitten Pond. And so the second slide here, or the second figure in the slide, these are the assessment sites, the reaches that we used for our fish study for this. And these are primarily the water quality sites. So jump ahead to the conclusions of that study. We found water quality was good to excellent in all locations during all sampling events. No significant evidence of water quality degradation. You know, if you look from upstream in the control reach all the way down to the bay, you don't see any evidence of degradation or impairment there. Slight increases in connectivity during all sampling events as you go downstream. Aquatic habitat was excellent for supporting fish and wildlife. And habitat surveys completed in the 4 stations that we looked at, those indicated excellent conditions. The benthic macroinvertebrate community was non-impaired. So the way you assess impairment is you look at a control station and then compare results downstream. Those all checked out. Slight impairment at the downstream station should not be interpreted as impairment. It's just a different habitat down there. So it's hard to compare a downstream station to a very different upstream station. But we don't see any evidence of impairment, just a slight difference. Fish data indicate good quality cold water community in the upper 2 sites, and then the lower 2 sites are indicative of transitional habitat, good conditions there as well. And then all species of wildlife in the area were common species and no rare, threatened, or endangered. Jumping ahead to post-construction of the rapid infiltration basin system, we were contacted again by you folks to evaluate stream conditions. The first thing we decided to do was review the permit file. There's an extensive file of compliance monitoring data associated with the groundwater discharge permit. And it's a huge amount of data. I mean, it takes a huge effort to get through all of that. So we reviewed what we thought was most critical to that, and what we're interested in from a water quality perspective are nutrients. So one of the things we looked at, total phosphorus, and this is total phosphorus over time. So construction of the rib discharge was in 2009. Prior to that, we have some baseline data, and then we've got up to 2015 in this slide is the latest data that we have. So you can see the axis here. We're looking at, this is 0.05. Now, a critical level would be around 0.01 to 0.03. Somewhere in there is going to be the threshold to long-term impairment. And you can see the baseline conditions are relatively high here. And in fact, some of the highest values we have are prior to the actual construction of the site. And I'm just setting this up for our narrative here so that we have relatively high phosphorus in the watershed prior to construction of this rib discharge. And if you put a trend line on this, it actually does trend downward with time. Not significantly, but the direction is down. We don't see any evidence of a spatial pattern here, and we don't see a low spot, a high spot, a low spot. I mean, they're all relatively noisy, and they are all relatively comparable. So the average value at the discharge station, let's see, in the upstream site, if you filter out all the data that don't have laboratory reporting limits and you just look at the reported levels, we're looking at a median value of about 13 parts per billion in the control station and about 11 in the discharge station. So we see just a very small difference, but it's a decrease from upstream to downstream. This is nitrate, which is a good proxy for total nitrogen. Levels are relatively low. I don't know if you can see that. That's not showing up real well, but prior to construction of the rib discharge, we're relatively low. Critical value would be 0.38. We're well underneath that. Then right after construction, we see this jump in some of the stations that we reviewed for nitrate. And this is a clear signal of the effect of the rib discharge. And it's pretty obvious where that's coming from. So we would call this an increasing trend with time in nitrate. The other thing we looked at was chloride. Chloride is a good indicator of what the effects of a point source load would be, because that is very mobile, doesn't get attenuated easily in the watershed, and so if you see high levels, you would expect that to be a result of the discharge. Low levels would be getting diluted back down. So background levels are very low for chloride here, and then right after construction of the rib discharge, we see a jump in certain stations where it goes up to about 80 to 100 milligrams per liter. The state standard for a chronic chloride condition is 230 milligrams per liter. So well below that. You don't see any individual values approaching that. The chronic value, so a 1 hour average value, is 860, and we're nowhere near that. So chloride levels are low. They get a little bit higher, but they're still low overall. And if we look at the next level of state regulation beyond just the water quality numerical standard, there's what's called the anti-degradation provisions. So any development, point source discharge, change, any effect that you could have on water quality should not degrade water quality, even if it meets a numerical standard. One of the ways to evaluate that is to look at the gap between what is the background condition, what is the standard, and that difference is kind of your buffer. So that, how much leeway do you have before you have an impairment? So our evaluation of this is that it's less than 20% of that buffer is actually used up as a chronic condition. So this impact does not cause impairment. It does not violate any water quality standards. So we'll jump right ahead to 2019. This is 10 plus years after construction and operation of the rib discharge and completing our 2008 studies. And what we wanted to do is kind of an apples to apples comparison. Let's repeat all of the studies we did in 2008. We'll do them exactly the same in the same locations and compare what are the before and after conditions here. So we looked at habitat, macroinvertebrates, the community that lives in the stream bed, fish, and water quality. And we added to the water quality some continuous monitoring because I saw that as a gap in our knowledge of what is happening on a short-term time scale. So we set out instrumentation to continuously record temperature and conductivity and see if anything is happening at an event scale that wouldn't be captured by monthly or quarterly sampling. So here's our study site, same as what we did in 2008. There's 4 stations that we evaluated for water quality, and there's 4 stations that are a little bit different that we evaluated for fish and macroinvertebrates. And so here's Route 109A. So our first station is right at that bridge. This is for water quality. We have a station in Witten Pond just upstream. We have a station in the rib discharge zone and one in the background area. Here's the rib discharge, and then are the rapid infiltration basins, and then the discharge zone is right below that on the hill slope. For the fish and macroinvertebrates and habitat assessment, we did the upstream boundary station, the downstream station in approximately the same location as where we were doing water quality, one down at the bridge, also in the same location, then one further downstream where we had previously done a study in 2008. So this is a little bit different from water quality, but it's far enough downstream that we wanted to capture what is the long-reaching effect, but you also have to deal with the fact that this is a very different habitat down here, which can muddle the results a little bit, and I'll explain that a little bit more. So here are the results of the habitat assessment. We went out and measured things like what is the canopy, what does the stream bank look like, what does the cross-sectional geometry look like. And you can see we distill down all the data to a bunch of metrics here. I don't know if these were explained at all. But you develop numerical metrics based on a visual assessment of the habitat, and then you come up with a score. So in the reference reach, which is the background, we have a total score of 159. Now we'll compare everything downstream to that. 163, 154, 173. So these are very comparable to the reference reach. There's no change in habitat or degradation of habitat upstream to downstream. So we would rank all of these in excellent condition.
Joe?
Yes?
Higher number is better on the total score?
Yes. So the other component to this study was the macroinvertebrate community assessment. We followed standard protocols for this. This is the EPA Rapid Bioassessment Protocols and the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Biomonitoring Protocols. So we're following standard methods here and repeating our effort from 2008. And this is a kick net sample. So we actually have a net, and we go out in the stream, jab it around, and gather up whatever comes into the net in a 3 square meter area. And then we take that sample, we send it off to the lab. They run standard analyses on that. And we determine, again, biological metrics, so numerical scores that we can assign to the community that lives there. And then we compare downstream stations to the upstream reference reach. And there's the scoring method we use. This is straight out of the EPA Rapid Bioassessment Protocols standard guide for us. And each of these are different metrics. And then here's how we evaluate the metrics scores. So these are the thresholds for impairment and non-impairment. Results of that. Station 1 here on the left is our reference reach. And here's all of the scores. These are all 6s. Those are as high as you can go. So, to a value of 6. I'm not sure if that's on this slide, but anyway. 6 is it, that's top tier, and for each of the metrics we assessed, we had all 6s for the reference reach, total score of 42, and then we compare what's immediately downstream to that. All 6s, 42, so they're identical, or equivalent rather. Station 3, which is below Witten Pond at the Route 109A bridge, this has a rating of 85.7, so slightly lower, but still considered non-impaired. And then Station 4 a value of 24, 57.1% comparable to the reference reach. So we would consider that slightly impaired. But, as I explained, these are different habitats here. Station 1 is a riffly, closed canopy trout stream, and Station 2 is also. So those are very comparable to each other. Station 3 gets into a flatter stream, it opens up a little bit more, different communities live there, it's a slightly different environment. And then Station 4 is, yet again, more open water, very different environment. So even though we would rank this as impaired because it's different from the upstream station, I would take that with a grain of salt, that it may not be impaired, it's just different because it's inherently different. So that's the trouble with using these metrics, but go ahead.
How does it compare back to 2008?
So in 2000, I'll jump ahead to that slide if you want, but it's actually improved. So we had, let me get the data for you, if I can. Okay. 2008 is over here on the left, so the reference reach. The next reach is impaired. Station 2, rather, is impaired. Station 3 is okay. Non-impaired at Station 2, slightly impaired at Station 3, moderately impaired at Station 4. In 2019, non-impaired at Station 2, non-impaired at Station 3, slightly impaired at Station 4. That's how we rank those. So that actually shows that it's slightly improved. And this is a very stable environment for the last 10 years. There's no development in the watershed. There's the discharge, but other than that, it's relatively stable and undeveloped.
Do you have that in our report?
What's that?
Is that in our report?
Yeah, that's in there. All of these slides are lifted right out of the final report.
Is that page number? 54. Okay,
You have it?
54. Thank you.
Yep. Any questions about that? And if you want a technical explanation, we've got George on the line. He can explain how they evaluate the macroinvertebrate community, how they develop the metrics, and how they score those. But the bottom line is, what do they say? Do we show evidence of impairment?
Hello,
Hi, George.
anybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
You
you.
hear me?
Yep.
Oh, now you're coming in. Oh, you were cutting in and out the whole time there.
Sorry.
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
Did you have something to add, George?
You're still cutting in and out.
All right.
I'm having a hard time following you.
All right. If we need you, I'll grab you.
All right. Hey, you want my cell number?
No, I think we're okay. I'll pick up the handset if I need you.
Okay, I'll be here.
So the next study was the fish assessment. Again, this is part of the rapid bioassessment protocols that we use. This is right out of the manual. It's what we did in 2008. So we're repeating that effort. This is an electroshocking or electrofishing assessment. We use a backpack shocker. We go out there. Sean's looking at me. It's going to keep me honest.
Sounds good.
And basically, you stun the fish, you collect them in a net, you count them, you look at their age classes and length, and what the species are, and we can develop metrics from that. So we shock a 150-meter reach, approximately. So you start downstream, you've got your electroshocker, you work your way upstream, and you capture everything that you possibly can that you can scoop up in the net. I don't know if you hold those or how that process actually goes as you're walking the stream, but
You hold everything in a live well, which would be a 5-gallon pail probably in this
Yeah.
situation, and just continue upstream as you go, collecting everything that you can get, and then at the end, sit down, identify, measure, weigh, look for abnormalities in the fish and stuff like that.
and from that, we take all that species information, develop metrics, and compare downstream to upstream, just as we do on the other studies. And here's the metric scoring guide. So all of these 12 metrics are what we evaluate over here, and then here's the scoring criteria, and then interpretation of the scoring results. So the thresholds for poor up to excellent overall biological integrity. And the results from that. So reference reach, station 1, caught nothing but brook trout, and lots of them. We caught 60 brook trout there. Station 2, more of the same. This is right in the discharge zone. Again, 67 brook trout, which is a huge increase from what we caught in 2008. I think we were catching 10 to 15 species, or 10 to 15 individuals during that study.
Joe,
Yes.
is there a time difference in terms of when they were collected? In other words, August versus May, June versus, because there are, as you know, they stock that, and I had asked that question earlier as well. As we're talking about different size fish. The fish that are stocked by Fish and Game are going to be substantially larger. I got that. But what about the time of collection? So if you're collecting 2008 or 2009 in June, and then you're collecting these samples in August, does that make much of a difference?
That would, or it could.
Yeah.
But I believe we sampled in August of 2008, and we actually geared our 2019 study to fit right in with the 2008 study.
Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Did you want to talk about stock versus native fish? Do you want some explanation there?
No, I understood that, and I thought the explanations that were provided by some of the field biologists made perfect sense to me.
But we believe that the vast majority of these are native fish,
Mhm.
not stocked fish. So stations 1 and 2, which are closed canopy, cold water stream, lots of pools and riffles, excellent habitat for trout. The trout are thriving there. As we head down to station 3, this is more of a transitional habitat where you have a mixture of cold water and warmer water species commingling there. We still caught trout, but then we also caught chain pickerel, golden shiner, pumpkin seed, eastern creek chubsucker, and bluegill. And the composition there has changed, and the number of individuals caught, 53, is still a substantial number. And then station 4, which is further downstream, and again, more open, warmer water, slower moving habitat, or slower moving water habitat. About 52 individuals there, and a few of the brook trout showing up, but more of the transitional species. So we turn those values into metrics, and these are the metric scores down here, and we translate that into a total score. And in this case, with the reference reach being the baseline condition and a total score of 60, we have equal scores to each of the 3 downstream stations, simply because they were either comparable to or better in terms of the species and diversity as compared to the reference reach. So of these 4 stations, reference reach 1, station 1, and station 2 are very comparable. So that's a good pairing there because they have comparable habitat. Stations 3 and 4 are slightly different, so it's a little harder to make comparisons between them, but we don't see what we would call evidence of impairment or degradation of quality. So another thing we did, because it is hard to make comparisons between those very different habitats, is we used the cold water fishery index of biotic integrity developed by New Hampshire DES. And technically we shouldn't use this because the basin is actually too small here. But if we go ahead and run the analysis on that to assess its value as a cold water fishery, and this should say station 3, or station 1 and 2 rather, not 3 and 4. We got that mixed up. I'll fix that in the final report for you. We see that they are basically identical between station 1 and 2. So the background station, the station that's located in the discharge area, if you evaluate it as a cold water fishery, it has excellent value as a cold water fishery, and the metric supports that.
Joe?
Yes?
If I recall, the 2008, you found substantially less fish than you did 2019. Would the nutrient increase that's associated with the RIB promote additional numbers of fish in those downstream? Is that a possibility that the increased nutrients provide more sources of food for the things that these fish are going to be feeding?
I wouldn't say it's not possible. However, when you're seeing substantial increases in brook trout in the reference station, which shouldn't be getting those additional nutrients, as well as in the impact sites, it kind of says to me that it doesn't seem like that's the case, if that makes sense.
And brook trout are carnivores.
Right.
They're insect eaters.
Right. So they've got, I guess what I'm trying to, in my head is that the nutrients are increasing the food sources right up from the algae up through the food chain. So there's more food, so therefore you'd have more predators, you would have more herbivores, you'd have more in the food chain.
Yeah, I mean, again, in a stream system environment like that, if that were potentially one of the cases, I think I would see that increase in the lower stations, but not necessarily in the upper stations. So I don't see any real evidence of that, I guess, would probably be the best answer.
All right.
We also did a rare, threatened, and endangered species review. So we reviewed terrestrial species, and this is just a listing of what could be present at the site, but we don't have any reason to suspect that there would be changes in their habitat over these 10 years or reasons to suspect that these would be affected by any changes to the watershed in the last 10 years. So we just did a species review here, looking at state listings. These are comparable to what they were prior to that, with also the addition of the long-eared bat, but this is not a habitat. The stream environment is not a habitat that directly supports them. So this is just a listing of what you could have in the area. We do have, in the stream itself, a number of fish that could potentially be present, and of those we've documented the brook trout, which is state listed as a species of greatest conservation need. And obviously they're thriving there. So that status is not threatened or endangered. It's just recognized as being a species that could benefit from protection. So not threatened or endangered, but recognized. And we also have the freshwater mussel, the eastern pearl shell, that we collected incidentally during our kicknet sampling and positively identified by Joe. And that's also listed as species of greatest conservation need. Any questions about that?
Well, and again, we're not seeing 2008. The Elliptio, which is the more common, was seen in 2008. And I didn't see any reference to them in the 2019.
Yeah.
I thought I had heard one of the field biologists say that as they were going through the kicknet sampling regime, that they noticed numerous mussels, but no identity was attributed to them. And as Joel pointed out, that they weren't in. That's not what their mandate was to do.
Yeah, the crew would have just gone through and strictly done their RPP protocols.
Yeah.
That's how.
But I guess my question is, were they noticing mussels in those downstream stretches? That,
the bottom two or the bottom three?
I'd say the bottom three.
The bottom
Upper, the reference station, 2 and 3.
Reference station and station 2, yes, I remember them. I think even in some of the notes they said lots of mussels in this area. Reference station 3, I didn't see anything referenced, but again, in the RPP protocol, it doesn't mean there aren't mussels there. It just means that they weren't collected in the sample and they weren't visibly identified during the process.
So we identified Elliptio in 2008,
Right.
but I think that was incidental. I think the biologist who was out there collected that and just took a look at it and said, oh, we caught Elliptio here.
What happened, we found a population of the eastern pearl further upstream from the reference point. And then your biologist found one downstream in 2019 by the discharge. The 2009 report said we found the Elliptio and no other mussels anywhere else. And I've always wondered whether or not they look relatively the same. When I talk to more proficient biologists, no, there's quite a bit of difference. But there seemed to be, in that case, an overlap of the two species, at least in the downstream stretch, which you would imagine. And again, it just never really set well with me that in 2008 they did see the pearl, they did see Elliptio, and then in the follow-up 2019 they see a pearl shell, and they didn't report any of the others.
So I'd have to preface any answer by saying I wasn't there in 2008 and I didn't do any of that work. From what I understand, the eastern Elliptio is a very common mussel in New Hampshire, and I don't know if there's any reason they wouldn't be
Right.
in the stream as well.
From what I understand, they're more adaptable. They can tolerate different more sediment, more issues than the Elliptio. Relatively cold water.
Yes. So moving on to water quality, the last component of our study here. We did two things for water quality. We collected monthly samples and we set out instrumentation for continuous monitoring. So here's a summary of the water quality sampling results. So we collected 5 samples once per month from May through September at 4 stations. We had those analyzed for chloride, nitrate, and total phosphorus. While we were out there, I also collected a temperature, dissolved oxygen, conductance, and pH reading with a YSI instrument. So here's a summary of each of the events, and the things that I like to focus on are the chloride and the total phosphorus to look for signals of impacts from the rib discharge. Chlorides in the background station are relatively low, so less than 6, 8, 8, 10, 6. Now we jump ahead to station 2, which is right in the discharge. Now we are up at 18, 32, 44, 44, 86, 86. This is during a drought period, so you had a very concentrated sample in the river at that point, or in the stream rather. And then down below that, in Witten Pond, we see slightly lower values in the teens and 20s, one hit of 32, and then in the downstream station 3 area, again elevated, but not quite as high as in the discharge zone, although we did get a hit of 62 milligrams per liter. Keep in mind the state standard is 230 or 860, depending on whether it's a chronic or acute condition. So definitely we see chlorides downstream that we weren't seeing upstream or back in 2008. So that's something that we consider a noticeable impact. Nitrate is also relatively high if you look upstream to downstream. So first set of samples, we have a very high reporting limit, so it's hard to get much information out of that. It just says less than 1 milligram per liter. Second set of samples, we go from less than a reporting limit at station 1 of 0.05 up to 0.4, so almost an order of magnitude jump there. And then about half that value for the downstream stations. And again, in the July event, we see 0.05, 0.06. In the background station, up to 0.6. in the discharge area. So an order of magnitude jump in concentration there of nitrates. That's true for the other events as well. With phosphorus, we see a bunch of noise. This is a very hard signal to kind of tease out, but we see very high values here. I mean, there is no state standard for phosphorus, but a threshold that we consider based on EPA guidance is 0.01 milligrams per liter. So here we are at 0.16. That's 10 times 1.6, 10.6 times higher than that, 16 times higher than that. 0.38, 0.55. 0.55 is very high. That is a very high phosphorus level. And we see high levels again in our June event, 0.2, right around that across the board. In our July event, we're still elevated but lower than the first two events. And then here's the one that I'm having a hard time figuring out. In August, we're back down there at low levels that we would expect. So 0.01, 0.01, 0.04, less than 0.01. That would be typical of the stream. These values are atypical. Again, in September, we're back up in that 0.1 plus milligrams per liter range. You have a question?
Yes, so is there some flow data associated with this?
I don't have flow. I do have stream stage. I'll get to that in a second. But yes, that's something I would want to look at, is how is this correlated with other signals that we would want to look at.
Well, I'm Dave Ford.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah, so I just, you're doing a great job with this data, but one thing I'd like to point out, kind of jumping out at me, when we look at the sites, 1, 2, and then 3 being in the pond, when we look at chloride, so clearly chloride is an indicator of the what's coming out. And when we see the chloride drop down at site 3, and we see the nitrogen drop down, my theory is that site is on the edge of the pond.
Yes.
Is there potentially short circuiting going through the pond?
I've wondered that.
So site 3 should be taken with that grain of salt. That it's not really, because as we see the phosphorus drop, the phosphorus stayed high there. So it's an indicator that potentially that site 3 should be taken with that in mind, that it's not really as indicated, because it's kind of sitting off to the side.
That's a valid point. I've thought of that as well. I think there is a flow path issue here. So where does water go once it enters the pond? Does it preferentially run down the center? Is there, there could be a groundwater component to this because you've got a dam there. Some of this may be going into shallow groundwater. Hydraulic bypass, that's a possibility here as well.
Yep. And the other thing too is with the spring data, obviously the river's running higher. So we do have rainfall data, and we have some stream gauging at 109A. But I think that's why you see a diluted sample in 19 Mile Bay. Doesn't explain the high phosphorus. I'm still at a loss of that. But with the chloride and the specific content, that's a little lower in spring, and then it gets higher, and that could explain some of the variations of it.
I've thought of that as well. I'm having a hard time reconciling a few of these pieces of data. The Witten Pond one is definitely one of them. Could be residence time issue, flow path issue. Yes?
Yeah, and I just wondered if you had any ideas of, in the May event, why phosphorus is so high but nitrates would be so low. If it was...
The nitrates are definitely responding to the wastewater input. The phosphorus, I think, is disconnected from that. I think that's driven by something else.
I mean, nitrate data too in May, you only went to less than 1. You didn't go to below 1. Was that the reason? That's why it might look a little different. See, they might have been 0.8, but you don't know because it just said less than 1.
This is sort of a public hearing, if you will.
For the May event?
The May nitrate data.
Yes. So it's hard to get any information out of that because the reporting limit's higher. Yes?
Were there different methodologies used, analytical methodology used for nitrate? I believe there were. And I'm wondering whether or not that would be a factor.
I talked to our lab about the analytical tests that they run. These are all standard methods,
Yeah.
and his feeling was that if they ran 2 different methods that were both approved, they should get a relatively good agreement between them. then you wouldn't be seeing a 50% variation or anything
Yeah.
like that. And they get tested, they get audited. These labs are running a very strict program. I have to believe the data that's coming out. When we see variations in reporting limits, that's another issue. That's not a method issue. That's sample processing. So if they have to run a dilution on the sample to get a better analysis, that will affect the reporting limit. So the reporting limit is a separate issue from method. Further questions? So what I did is I put our sample data in with the Wolfboro data and show this as a time series. This is total phosphorus, and these are just stations 1, 21, and 4 from Wolfboro, which are equivalent to our 1, 2, and 3. And you've already seen this. These are phosphorus levels in station 1 prior to commencement of operations at the ribs in 2009. You can see we're up here at 0.1. This is a high value, about 10 times higher than what we would expect or hope to see in the stream. So 0.01 is way down here, and you can see there's a lot of values that are over this threshold. There's a downward trend with time, and then there's our data here that jump out at you as being very different from what else we've seen in the stream. And I don't have a great explanation for this. I think our data are valid. I mean, all of these data, with the exception of the highest one, are actually within the range of what's already been seen and documented out there. We have very low values of phosphorus during one of our events, so we're not biasing high overall if we're seeing values that are comparable to or close to what we would expect to see. So what is it? Is it a data anomaly or is it a trend? I don't think we can answer that at this stage, but it definitely is worth exploring further why we're seeing these very high values during monthly sampling that we're not seeing during quarterly sampling. Yes?
So it is interesting, we've been discussing this, and it is kind of interesting, but we have hundreds and hundreds of samples up to this point, and we attributed those as we call a point that's outside the normal, because we're taking gram samples, maybe some organics that have gotten in there, so when we see those high ones, that must be the aberration, because the norm we've seen was all much lower, and then you had the 5 samples and 4 of them were really high, 1 low, so now we're like, ooh, that's kind of weird, because you couldn't attribute that many anomalies in 5 samples and 4 of them are high. Like if I have 200, 300 samples, I have 3 high, well that's okay, we can throw those data points out. You can't throw these data points out because we don't understand them.
You really can't. I mean, we can wave our arms and try to give explanations, but the truth is we just don't know.
No, I don't know.
I do think it warrants further investigation though, because these are high values. And if this were to be repeated, if every summer you were seeing levels of phosphorus this high, I think there would be some concern around that.
Right, well, our data points are along, not the same days, do not agree. So we do have our data, which is different, so we do have to figure this out.
We also look at nitrate, and again we have very high levels here. The majority of our data points are within the kind of the same range that Wolfboro was documenting, but we do have some very high levels at our discharge site, as high as 1.6 milligrams per liter. This line here is 0.38, which is kind of the threshold that we use to evaluate whether nitrate is high or more typical, and where you would hope to see it. So nitrogen's high, it's trending upward with time. We think this is most likely a impact, or an effect rather, of the discharge. So we'll compare the samples we collected in 2008 and 2019 with the Wolfboro data set. And this is a summary of that by site. And these are the median values, which kind of filter out the extremes and give you a good representation of the middle value in a skewed data set. So in 2008, we were at, let's call this parts per billion. So I'll say 15 in the reference reach, 13 in the discharge area, 18 in Whitten Pond, and 16 downstream. 2019, we jump up, we're basically 10 times higher than that. 110, 140, 86, and 120. Wolfboro sees values that are lower and comparable to our 2008 study. So 13, 11, 13. This is phosphorus. With nitrogen, again, we see very low levels. In 2008, our reporting limit was 0.5, which is a pretty high reporting limit. It's hard to evaluate that. But Wolfboro sees values in the reference region around 70, in the discharge area around 150, and downstream at 110. We're showing actually a lower value in the reference reach of 42, much higher value in the discharge area of 580, in Witten Pond 120, and downstream at 285. So there's no state standard for nitrate. The permit for the discharge is limited to 10 milligrams per liter, so we're nowhere close to that. And chlorides we also looked at. We don't have the Wolfboro data to complement that, but significant increase from 2008 to 2019. The other thing we did was continuous monitoring so that we could look at connectivity, which is a proxy for chloride, over time and see how that looks at the shorter duration timescales. So here's the regression we developed between specific conductance and live readings of specific conductance and chloride as measured at the laboratory. You get a relatively straight and well-distributed trend line here. And so we're going to use site-specific data rather than published data for regressions. DES has their own statewide regression, but this is site-specific, so we prefer to use that. Continuous monitoring data, this is temperature by site. We have stations 1 through 3 and Witten Pond. So as you would expect, temperatures are highly variable. They go up, reach a peak in August, and then start to come back down. Overlaid that, these black dots are daily discharge from the rib site in hundreds of thousands of gallons per day. So up at 300,000 gallons per day, dropping down to 275,000, and discharges were daily, with the exception of an almost 5-day period in July when the system was brought offline. I said, oh great, we have daily discharges, and then it's taken offline, maybe we'll see a change that's a response to that. And there's really nothing. There's no change in temperature due to the rib system coming offline, and it basically is just buried into the noise. Interestingly, we have our lowest temperatures are at station 2. This is the yellow line here. You can see that it's always lower than the other stations. This is right in the discharge area. I suspected that we were seeing a cooling effect due to the groundwater influence coming off the rib site. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it's definitely cooler there. Streams naturally change temperature over their course. There's a lot of heat sources and heat sinks along the way. So if you see a change in temperature, you can't always correlate that to a point source effect or a mixing effect. But I thought it was interesting anyway. Here's the specific conductance data. So these are microsiemens per centimeter over here, and station 1, which is our reference, is the blue line. It's a relatively flat line, slightly increasing throughout our study period ending in August, and we're right around 50 or less. All the other stations downstream have much higher values, increasing with time, and at the bottom, the gray line is stream stage, so this is a proxy for flow. Higher stage, higher flow, lower stage, lower flow. We're drying up throughout the summer. We had a very dry August and September. So as the stream dries up and the proportional influence of groundwater discharges increase to that, you would expect to see increasing connectivity. That's exactly what we see. The highest levels are at station 2. Station 3 is slightly below that. Witten Pond follows its own signal here, probably due to the complexities of the stream flowing through the pond, as we've talked about. Using our regression, we convert specific conductance over to chloride, estimated chloride. So the same signal, but now we have chloride numbers to work with. You can see we peak out here at just about 80. The highest value for a grab sample was 86. State standard is 230 or 860, so we're well below that. And that's at the station 2 is where we see our highest values, station 3 below that. Background station is at about 10 milligrams per liter, but it's closer to 8 based on the lab analyses. So one of the things we can evaluate with chloride, because there is a state standard and we're nowhere close to that, what effects does this have in terms of anti-degradation? And this is something I was looking at. So are they meeting the law or regulations based on anti-degradation? Anti-degradation is based on the existing uses in the stream, but also based on the buffer between the observed value, or rather the background condition, and the state standard, so within that buffer. And again, we're at about 40% of that buffer at the worst case scenario is being used up. But really anti-degradation is based on long-term effects. So comparing our highest values isn't really a great comparison, but gives you an idea of the effect and what there is reserved. So how much capacity does the stream have to take on more chloride before it can become impaired? So even though we see these big increases, it's not an impairment by the state's definition. Summary of our conductivity and temperature data. Lowest temperatures are at station 2. See that across the board. Conductance and chloride, highest values are at station 2. So we go from, let's look at the median value. This is a best representation of the data set. So background station's around 11 on average, station 2 is around 31, and station 3 is around 31. So that's a threefold increase from upstream to downstream. One of the things I didn't discuss is that we lost about a month's worth of data from our data set due to equipment failure. So we don't know what happened in between there. I suspect we didn't miss anything critical because we had the conditions we were hoping to see throughout the study period. So in May we had high flows and low temperatures, and throughout the summer it dried out and got hotter. So I think we caught peak temperatures and close to minimum flows. So as a surrogate, I've got the closest gauged river data from the Bear Camp River here. As you can see, our data set, which ends in August, coincides with a very low flow period in August. There is a prolonged low flow period in September that we did not capture, but I think we reached absolute minimums during our study. So this is basically just to give context and discussion to what we did not capture. So it would be great if we had that data. I don't think we missed anything critical. Comparing 2008 and 2019 study results. So here's the big summary of the two studies. 2008 is on the left, 2019 is on the right. Reference station 1, station 2, 3, and 4. Let's compare them. So we assessed habitat. Habitat scores in 2008 were excellent across the board. In 2019, they remain excellent. Macroinvertebrates. In 2008, we saw no evidence of impairment in station 2, slight impairment in station 3, and moderate impairment in station 4. In 2019, we see no impairment at station 2, no impairment at station 3, slight impairment at station 4. So we don't see any evidence of degradation when you assess macroinvertebrates in the stream. We see improvement, if anything. With fish, more of the same. 2008, we caught 10 to 16 individuals per sample. Those individuals we caught all scored very high using our metrics analysis, and we considered biological condition to support fish to be good overall. In 2019, we have far more numbers of samples, of fish samples collected, but again, we see excellent conditions across the board.
So that's, this gentleman here, that's what I was commenting on. You see the stations 1 and 2, the numbers are substantially higher for fish than what they were in 2008 for the reference station and right at the discharge. So that's what I was commenting on. You go from 9 to 16 to 60 to 67. And again, whether or not the nutrients, the availability of nutrients is allowing more fish to be sustained there because they have the food sources, right from the algae all the way up from the chain.
Yeah, I guess I just couldn't speak to that in terms of what we did in our study. I mean, we've upgraded our electric fishing equipment in the last decade. Who knows what the stream conditions were this year as compared to when we did it the first time. There's a lot of variables that I don't have the answers to that make me not want to confirm or deny anything.
That's okay. That's okay.
But 60 brook trout for a catch is pretty good.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And then comparing water quality between 2008 and 2019. Phosphorus levels in 2008 were much lower. In 2019, they're much higher, as we've discussed. Nitrate, it's hard to compare because we had a high reporting limit in 2008, but we do see higher values, especially in the downstream sites as compared to the reference reach. DO conditions were comparable, right around 100% saturation, as you would expect, with the exception of Whitten Pond, where we have very high supersaturated conditions in all of the measurements that we took there. Specific conductance, low across the board in 2008, still low in 2019 at our reference reach, but jumping up much higher values in the downstream areas. And let's wrap this up. Major conclusions here. We assessed aquatic habitat, fish community, and macroinvertebrates. Those are very rigorous metrics to evaluate stream health. They're comprehensive. They're a summation of all of the intricate factors at work here, and these all indicate excellent conditions in 2008 and equal or better conditions in 2019. In Whitten Pond, we have some kind of ancillary evidence of eutrophication, eutrophication being nutrient enrichment, which can lead to impairment. So I just noticed while I was out there, there's a lot of growth. While we were taking DO measurements, noticed very high levels of dissolved oxygen, which is a symptom of excessive growth. And we did not see evidence of this in 2008, but we weren't specifically looking for it. So we may have evidence here of eutrophication of Whitten Pond, something that we might want to look into further. Conductivity and chloride and nitrate nitrogen have all increased since 2008 in the stations at or below the rib discharge site. This is unequivocal. We've got evidence that there is a change between them. No water quality standards were exceeded during this, and maximum chloride levels represent about 39% of the available assimilative capacity due to the chronic standard. So there's no impairment here, even though we see an effect. That's our conclusion. Total phosphorus levels are high overall and are routinely in excess of guidelines, and our levels in 2019 were excessively high. We don't have an explanation for this, but further data from Wolfboro shows that it's back down to lower levels. Either way, the levels are too high, and it's a watershed-wide issue. Is there a question?
And you're not attributing the total phosphorus to the RIVs?
No, I'm not going to make that statement. We think because we see high phosphorus in the background station, because we see high phosphorus in the years preceding development of the RIV, that it's more of a watershed issue. There is an effect from the RIVs. We don't know how large it is. And that really wasn't the goal of this study. The study was to do a comparison. What is the overall condition in 2019? What was the overall condition in 2008? I mean, we can connect a lot of dots here, but it's speculative. I don't think we have the information to make that conclusion. So based on those conclusions, what are our recommendations? Based on the aquatic habitat, fish, and macroinvertebrate data that we've collected, we think that this is a relatively stable system, and we don't see any need to go out there and sample this every year. I think if there's a change to the watershed, if there's a change to the discharge, it might be worth going out there and reevaluating this at some point. We put up here a 5 to 10 year interval, but it could be anything. But we don't think that's a pressing need to go out and do this yearly. Whitten Pond, we do have some evidence of eutrophication. We think that warrants further study. We could do some continuous monitoring of DO and see what that looks like. We can collect further samples. Nutrient data, the chlorophyll A data would help us to determine the trophic state. We do a phytoplankton analysis to see what sort of growth is happening in response to the overloading of nutrients in the pond. We can determine the trophic state and see whether it meets what we would consider impairment. And then we notice that phosphorus is high throughout 19 Mile Brook, including in the background. So we have a lot of phosphorus in here. We don't quite have the explanation for why. We suspect it's due to sediments, particulate phosphorus that gets into the water column and becomes dissolved in available phosphorus. We suggest continued phosphorus sampling. I think a higher resolution sampling would help us to answer some of these questions we have about why is it so variable. We could do further review of the available permit file to try to correlate some of these effects that we're seeing with other things that we hadn't considered, including erosion events, deposition events, flow events, weather events. There's any number of variables we can consider. Then one other thing we might look at is watershed-wide what is happening in 19 Mile Brook. Do we see total phosphorus that's excessively high in the uppermost headwater reaches here, or is it really just down in this middle and lower segment of the brook? And I believe that's my last slide. So, open it to questions. If you're awake. Anything further? Can we wrap it up? All right, I think we're done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes. All right, guys, are you still on the phone?
Is it
You still there?
Happy New Year, my friend. New Year, how are you?
Oh, thank you.
Huh? Yeah. Yep.
This is a game. Next game.
They're pretty constant.
Thanks, guys.
400, and then we have 3/4, so I don't know how we address it, but.
Yeah.
Harry, how you doing? Good, good. Yeah, long time no see. 2004. I guess.
Is it over, or are you gonna have one?
Well, we're gonna discuss the warrant.
We're gonna talk about the warrant articles, or to do more warrant.
Right, we're changing up, we're gonna do a capital reserve, because this came in too late. Couldn't figure out what to do next year.
Are we gonna talk about this another time?
Sure. Come in anytime. Yeah, because we have to design an RFP to address these issues. So you agree? Yeah, do that.
Well, he would have enjoyed opportunity to,
Oh, later, you gotta pick up some, something that just gets, so it's hard. Well, the grab sampler, that's the problem.
Well, yeah, the
Oh, I saying, oh, yeah, I think what we're doing is we're fine, to just make sure everyone understands that it's responsive, because, Pat Tonsell, Harry Stewart used to be the head of the water district, and he years. And Pat is head of the information association.
Bill, are we taking a break, or are we gonna just? No, I didn't do that. All right, so let me put it on pause.
Just as a conclusion to that presentation, we've got a warrant article proposed to set up a capital reserve account to do further testing. And we'll talk about that when we do the capital reserves or the warrant articles. The next item of business is the signature file, which is on the bigger desk.
I'll speak to that.
Okay, great.
This is,
There you go.
this is our contract with, Solitude Lake Management to do the herbicide application for 2020. And it just, this is, money is budgeted for it this year. It's important to get it started now so that they can get the permit application in early enough so that they can do the application of the herbicide during the appropriate point in the season.
Great. So this is the contract to do the herbicide.
Right.
Solitude Lake Management in the amount of $1,200. Well, I guess we're no longer broadcasting. Okay, the amount of $1,290.
Yeah, there are two.
February, March, and then 3722 June, August.
Right.
13 July, September, 1,050, and late October for a total of $7,362. Plus Phragmites, is that how you say that?
Yeah, Phragmites.
Okay. So this is optional treatment, and you,
And that's one that we're
That's
gonna
recommended.
pursue this year because of the recurrence of the Phragmites.
so the Phragmites are gonna get attacked with $2,195 in August and $1,400 in late October. And then okay. Then it's just a signature page.
Right.
And is it just one
For the
signature?
permit application, yes.
Okay. So in all of these situations, there's only one signature?
That's correct.
All right, I'll entertain a motion.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I'll wait and do this with
Yeah.
Karen.
Make sure we get it done right. Good idea, yeah.
Well, I put him for that, because you said the only one thing that will change is the Phragmites this year. Is that correct?
It should, yeah.
Okay. I'll look at it.
So, yeah,
Okay.
well, we can go through it and make sure that we're.
Thank you for your dedication, Bill.
Okay. Selectmen's updates, do we have any?
I have a couple of observations and they're positive.
Sure.
I don't know if it was our road agent or the state, but they removed the snow from Tuftonboro Corner and made it a
Yeah.
lot safer.
Yeah.
Thank you, whoever did it. The other thing is, we had a dedicated police officer for the, what is it? January
Beer Fest.
Fest.
Yeah.
At the beach. Everything went well there. Thank you to the police department and the fire department that made it, were appropriate.
Okay, anything from Mr. Marshall?
Let's see. Ag Commission is meeting tomorrow, a monthly meeting at 4 p.m. Anybody that might be interested in stopping in to observe, participate, certainly welcome. And Planning Board has our first meeting of the month on Thursday evening. The other thing that I would mention, as we got Consolidated's conversation today, we do have another provider in phone service in town, which they didn't seem to be aware of, but I'm wondering if it makes sense to reach out to TDS with respect to the same issue, which is high-speed internet. There is
So is your
internet.
concern that the clients of TDS won't be able to avail themselves of whatever we do?
Well, they seem to be not tuned into the fact that there are two different phone companies in the town of Tuftonboro, and I'm not convinced that the federal regulations allow them to operate in the other phone company's area. I may be wrong, but I know they're not allowed to provide phone service, whether they're allowed to expand into other areas. So I'm just thinking, plug in with them. TDS is a nationwide company. It's not huge, but they serve a lot of smaller markets across the country. I know in some areas that they're in New Hampshire, they have a big push on for their improved high-speed internet, like down in Chichester, for instance. I just think it makes sense to reach out to them and see what they were doing, and it may be if they all can operate where the other guy operates. Let's get competition in here. Let them all duke it out. May the best guy win.
On a personal note, 2 years ago when I bought my house, I asked about putting internet in, and I'm in a 544 phone district, and they said that because they were so small in this location, that was not compatible with them. But that might have changed in the last 2 years, so let's investigate it.
We have internet service from TDS. They offer internet.
Probably DSL.
It is DSL, right?
Which?
It's not high speed, no.
No.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
standing is not acceptable.
the one thing I took out from this meeting and also the meeting in Wolfboro was they're nowhere near ready to sit down and talk a realistic bargain. And we could make including Melvin Village part of the deal.
Yes.
And they just have to figure out how to do it. But as far as, I'm still not satisfied with the answer when I ask, we're doing all the heavy lifting, buying the equipment and the cable, but we don't have any control over the rate or any participation in the rate. And I honestly don't think they can borrow money through a municipality using the municipality's bond rating, which is a hell of a lot better than Consolidated's rating, to avail themselves of cheap money, and then they control the collection of that money. I don't think that's
No,
going to fly.
they're gonna send us more detail on it.
Right.
They're working deals like this in other communities in New Hampshire right now.
Theoretically, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
let's listen to them, look at what they,
All right.
that's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's a budget hearing tomorrow night at the townhouse, February 4th at 6:30. We're having an early get-together for cocktails at 6. Right?
No.
No.
Just a
No.
pre-meeting with just the
We're
budget.
going to pre-meet with the budget committee at 6 to go over any.
If we're gonna have cocktails,
Frayed
we need to
edges.
meet earlier than that.
Yeah, I think we need to have some, local ordinances to that effect, just to keep it reasonable. I think, I agree that having that pile of snow gone is nice. It'd be nice if the person didn't park their car right in the way. I still can't see around that corner. So, and we still don't have any resolution with regard to an additional stop sign or,
I have a,
God forbid,
I have a
flashing
call
light.
into HEB. Josh McAllister made a comment that there might be federal funds or whatever, and I have a request into him for me to get me a copy
I think
of
we
that.
could probably spring for a stop sign without going to the feds, but
So
we'll have to see. Yeah,
that's an idea of something,
right,
right? That's on Tebbets Road in Rochester.
right.
And it's,
Yep.
and we have indication from the state that they're, they don't have a problem with us doing some
Some of our own
things,
stuff.
some of our own stuff
Yeah,
in the
they won't
area.
put a flashing yellow light going down
Across,
the road.
across the other area, no.
But maybe we
No.
get some signage on it.
Well, but.
And also
but-
some
but
rumble
again,
strips like they have in Effingham.
I would,
The grooves
I
in
would,
the road.
no.
That's state
no,
road,
that-
that's
well,
state
no,
road to
no.
state road, though.
Well,
That's not a-
even on the town, those are, you got two issues with those rumble strips. One is, for the people that live along there, it's hell. Okay, the
Yes.
other thing is, it's a maintenance issue for the road. It degrades the pavement, and, I mean, I think flashing light and a sign that says cross traffic doesn't stop is gonna increase the visibility for
Right.
people that blow through that stop sign. It's not gonna guarantee that they don't.
Where is it?
I'm sorry?
Where is it?
Federal Corner, and
No, it's-
Ledge Hill and,
Tough to know.
171.
yeah, Ledge Hill and 171,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. On to correspondence. We have a letter, or a bunch of emails from Jay Crystal, from ChemServe, looking to bid on an RFP for testing at the transfer station. We also have a copy of an email sent to Dan Bernard, our moderator, from the New Hampshire government on behalf of New Hampshire voters. And there are webinars for poll workers for the presidential primary. I guess, I don't know what the dates are, but I'm sure they're on. And also some webinars for moderators. Hopefully Dan will take advantage of that.
If you are interested, we just need to register. That's all.
I'm sorry?
If you are interested,
Yeah.
I just need to register before.
And anyone who is interested in presidential primary election official training or
Right.
polling place line management, they can come in and see Karen and register. And discuss how or if you'd like to convey the message to Skip Hurt and or Al Graymont in regards to their not voting, in regards to your not voting for their petition articles and your suggestion on how to handle it at the town meeting. We had, if I remember right, had decided that we weren't gonna recommend or not recommend the reclassification of roads. We're gonna leave it up to them, because they came in by petition. So we don't really get to weigh in on a petition.
The petition has to stand that way on its face.
Right. And I don't have a problem. First of all, both Skip and Mr. Graymont have to present their warrant articles, or have someone present their warrant articles. I don't have a problem with one or all of us deciding to speak up in favor of it.
Sure.
At the town meeting.
I didn't know, I think you and I talked on last week, or Friday, I think. If you would like me to give them a phone call, just a courtesy phone call, if you'd like me to draft a letter, just, because I know they're under the, particularly Skip, and I'm the impression that we wanted to vote on it. from his meetings with you.
Right,
And
I
things
think
like
maybe we
that.
have to create a letter, shove Karen and I get together, do a
Sure.
letter,
Yeah.
sign it and send it off.
Yep.
Just explaining that it's a petition, we don't get to vote on petitions, so we're just going forward, and they're gonna have to present, and we are, I think, all in support of doing it.
With some
conditionally.
conditions, right?
And I've learned since the last meeting that if petition warrant articles don't involve an appropriation, then you don't have to vote, but if they
Right.
involve an appropriation, you do.
Right,
May I go back to the landfill monitoring email?
sure.
That gentleman asked if, rather than doing the whole overall analysis, that company just does sampling, and wanted to know if that's something that we would find beneficial.
My
And I-
opinion is have him submit his proposal for
Okay.
what he does. What I remember is, he's comfortable saying, I can do this for you, but this other open-ended piece about coming in and doing all kinds of other recommendations,
Right.
he doesn't want to get into.
That's right.
My suggestion is he just submit a proposal for what he is interested in, and then when we evaluate proposals, that'll be part of, again, because the open-ended piece that's in there is open-ended, so it's,
Yeah, I don't know if we wanna.
we may not get a lot of response to that piece, part of it anyway.
But I don't know if we want to bifurcate the RFP, so to speak. I mean, I would rather have us put an RFP together for what we want to have happen.
Yes.
And if somebody wants to bid on part of it, then we'll take, but we don't want to preclude someone from doing the whole thing.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
right. But this is the guy that doesn't, I got the idea, isn't interested in this whole other undefined realm out there
Right.
as part of it.
So he's welcome to submit it as he advises.
What he should do is submit a bid and it gets opened with the others,
Yeah.
right?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, any public comment?
I have,
Oh, really?
yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, what up?
First on the list, where is that community TV meeting? You told me before, is it up in Conway?
Yeah, I believe it's at Conway. I'll look it up, I'm sure Karen knows.
High-speed
Okay.
cable, high-speed
Yeah.
cable meeting.
Right,
Yeah.
and I think it's if I remember right, it was at the Conway
Community center or
Public
something?
Library, I thought, but
Oh.
I'll find out.
Well, give it to Karen. I want to go back a little bit on the cable people, okay?
Yeah.
Once upon a time, you've been here longer than I have. We'll go back to Adelphia, Time One, whatever. There was a problem with putting cable up on the poles. I'm only familiar with a lot of this because I used to climb poles. You get electric, then you get telephone, so cable came in the middle. Well, if they're gonna come down with fiber, where the hell are they gonna put it?
No, they're replacing their telephone lines.
Okay,
That's the understanding that I got. This is the telephone company, and they're gonna replace their copper telephone lines with fiber optic lines.
Right.
not to be slanderous, but I got a bridge in New York that I wanna sell you. Anyhow, long story short, when people also should be able to get fiber, and it comes to your house, new equipment's going to be involved, okay? I'm just telling you that right off the bat. Right now, we're experiencing Spectrum, if you've got internet service, and they do upgrades on their equipment. And all of a sudden, the speed you used to get, you don't get anymore unless you go out and buy a new router. You get it to the modem that they give you, but then when it goes to the router, you gotta buy a new router. So that may be another issue later on down the line, is should we ever get that far, okay? That's all I got.
And part of that
Made a comment.
is in the negotiation of what you do for a service provider, or these, let's say we use Consolidated. If you want everybody in town to have 1 meg of ability, then that's what you negotiate. I mean, if you don't care that they're starting at a half or 0.5 or whatever and moving up, then they get to decide what they're gonna charge for an upgrade. I mean, so there are a
Well-
lot of moving pieces going forward.
They did it reverse. They upgraded their software at the location. Now it's coming on down the line, you get it right, the modem that they gave you, okay? But the rest of the equipment in your house may not be compatible or as fast.
Well, yeah, I don't think we can get them to buy everybody a new television, but I think this is the telephone company and not the cable company. So we've got a little more flexibility, and they also wanna use our money.
And as far as prices are concerned, like Lloyd mentioned, okay, you get your telephone bill, your cable bill, half of it's for service and the other half is full of taxes. So, all right, I said my piece. I'll see you tomorrow night, how's that sound?
Yeah, great.
We'll be there.
Great. Any other business or public comment?
I guess I was just gonna comment on the internet stuff as well. I too used to climb poles. I used to install internet for when it was Metrocast and for one of their contractors. So I have a
Boy, you're old.
little, I know, a long time ago. So I have a little bit of knowledge on that stuff. Additionally, I've actually talked to Spectrum about getting high-speed cable, because all I have is consolidated and all I can get is 10 megs at my house, and that doesn't cut it. And frankly, when I'm bidding on work against people who are, in suburban Boston, and it is literally the speed of your internet will dictate how fast your bid goes through, and I'll lose out to people down there for
Sure.
different things. So, anyways, I've talked to Spectrum. It's been a few years now. Spectrum, the cable company. And I actually talked to some of the guys that I used to work with over at Metro, and they actually looked at the maps and they looked at. I see where the tap is down on Brown Road, and they were able to map it. They said, yeah, it looks like you'd have to run 1,700 feet of hard line to get it up to your house. Spectrum said they wanted about $5,000 to run that up there. So that's a little cost prohibitive at this point. And what Bill said as far as getting several companies, I think if you can have 2 or 3 separate internet providers all hanging on the same pole, that's gonna, in the long run, that's ideal. That said, they may want to kind of avoid that competition and say, hey, if you give me exclusive access, then they may want to.
What we found before, when we were looking at the cable franchise renewal several years ago, is that there isn't a legal prohibition for another cable provider coming in.
Okay.
But as I remember, and Joe can probably speak to this better than I can because you were on that committee, basically Metrocast in the next town doesn't want to get in a war with whoever the provider, I don't remember who it was that had the franchise here. It's like, yeah, well, if I go in and I cable your town and I start competing with you, then you're going to come into my towns and start competing with me. Now, some of that is going on now.
Okay.
Rochester's, there's some going on. Laconia, there's some going on. But what they have that we don't have is higher population density.
Right.
So if there's a big enough market potential there for the cost of getting in, I think they tend to wade into it.
You don't have any control over the cable companies. You don't have any negotiating posture with them because it's eliminated from the contractual agreement. What we've been looking at as the Carroll County Coalition, there are places, for instance, in Vermont that own all the cable, or all the fiber optic. The town owns it, or the county owns it. And they pay for it through a bond, and they hire a mechanic service company to keep it serviced. That's one model. What Consolidated wants to sell us is, let's replace your telephone with fiber optic, and then you get all your cable stuff through there, and you pretty much eliminate the need for a cable company ultimately.
Yep.
Because you got all this stuff coming through the fiber optic. But they're still invested in a business model that superimposes a significant profit margin and lack of control into their box and out of ours. So it's an unequal
Right.
agreement,
Yeah.
or set of agreements could happen. So we need to look at what they're gonna offer, but I guess I'll report back after the next meeting of the Carroll County. If we can get some federal money, get some bonding, local bonding, the business model may be totally different from what Consolidated is saying.
Mhm.
So, who knows?
And I guess where, I understand if someone says, hey, I'm gonna buy this, 10 acres and my driveway's 800 feet long, and I understand a cable company may not want to spend the money on the infrastructure for one customer today, okay? But in my case, like, my house went in 20 years ago, so my question is, over time, I think there's an expectation of they need to move that service closer up there. So, and again, we're not talking about Consolidated, we're talking about time.
Right, but that's the cable agreement of which we have no control. I mean, they say you gotta have 7 houses in a mile, whatever.
Yeah.
They don't have it up at Winter Circle Farm. I mean, there are areas of town where the population density is high enough, but they still don't put the cable up there. And there's no leverage that we have as a select board. There's we can't throw them out, we can't charge them money, we can't cut fees that we charge them. There's nothing that we have for leverage. So
When do those get renegotiated?
Well, when it gets renegotiated, we don't have any leverage either.
So the only control we have, and this is under federal law, is as it relates to cable television. But the big piece of that today, over the cable, is internet.
Right.
And other services, and that's outside of the.
So you're saying because they're primarily a phone company, there's nothing we can do, whereas.
No, this
This is the cable company.
Consolidated is
So
the phone
the
company.
laws, the federal laws that govern cable companies were written back when what they did is provide cable TV. And there hasn't been any update to accommodate these other services. So all of the stuff other than basic cable TV is outside of
we can make sure
the
you
franchise agreement.
get New Hampshire Public Broadcasting on your station thing
Yeah.
instead of Maine Public, but that's about it.
Mhm.
And that's why, but, I mean, and we could go on and on and on, but when Consolidated sits there and says, oh, and we've included free of charge 3 municipal buildings, well, that's not good enough for me.
Right.
We've got more than 3.
Right.
So don't say that's
That's a starting point of the conversation.
That's the
Right.
fait
That's
accompli,
the starting
isn't it?
point of the conversation, and you go from there. So,
There's
And you
lot
have a
of-
copy of the contract I gave all 3 of you, okay? And they violated that in the years that they've taken
They
over.
don't
this,
care.
this.
I know,
this is
that's
the cable,
exactly-
you're talking about the
Two
cable
different
company.
companies.
It's
Right.
cable, right,
Right.
they don't care.
Right. So the technology has blurred the lines between what the different companies do. So, phone company used to be the phone. Cable company used to be your TV.
Yeah.
All the money and the demand and interest is in internet, and so everybody's migrating that way. And whether the cable company is running fiber, which they are, and the phone company is running fiber, which they are, pretty soon you have physically 2 things out there that look identical, that belong or are run by companies that came from a different initial focus, but everybody's chasing where the dollar is. So that's where they end up in the middle.
I want to bring this to a close, but
Good.
if there were 2 fiber optic cables hanging out of the telephone pole, the one owned by the cable company would be the least negotiable for any town resident, because they don't have to negotiate. The one owned by the telephone company, given these guys' idea that they're going to use our money, would be probably the most negotiable, which I think would drive the cable company
Mm-hmm.
in areas like this to just leave the cable the way it is and sell television.
To change the subject, do we need to brush up on any 2020 warrant articles?
Yeah, do we need to do that?
Do you have any?
Well, I have Rick's advice, so if you wanna look at that during
All
non-public.
right.
And do
Wanna
we
do
have a folder
warrants?
for non-public?
Mhm.
Okay.
We're doing non-public?
Well, that's legal
Warrant?
advice, the warrant article I have some legal advice on the warrant.
All
I
right,
think
so
that's-
I'm gonna make a motion that we go into non-public RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 2, parent L for legal correspondence with 2 different law offices.
Second,
All those in favor?
Would yes?
Marcus, and yes.
I'll be yes.